My name is Cassidy Merritt. I am 34 years old. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, the quiet daughter nobody worried about, which turned out to be exactly how my brother wanted it. For 7 years, he built a lie about me so carefully, so patiently, that my own parents began looking at me the way you look at a stranger you're not sure you should trust. He told federal investigators I was a fraud. He took $40,000 from my parents' retirement savings and used my name as the reason they needed to give it to him. He did all of this while standing at the head of the family dining table, beer in hand, playing the devoted son to a room full of people who never thought to check. I never confronted him. I never threatened him. I never even let him know I was coming. I just opened a spreadsheet. Before I take you into this story, if something in that opener landed somewhere real for you, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means I can keep telling stories like this one. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Now let me take you back to Akron, Ohio, to a kitchen that always smelled like instant coffee and dish soap, and the first time I understood that in my family, being quiet was the same as being invisible. Our house on Glenwood Avenue was a 3-bedroom ranch with aluminum siding the color of old cream. My dad, Ray Merritt, kept the lawn mowed in perfect diagonal stripes every Saturday from April to October. It was the one thing in his life he controlled completely. My mom, Linda, worked the overnight cleaning shift at a medical office complex on the east side, came home at 6 in the morning smelling like lemon disinfectant, and was asleep by the time I left for school. They were good people, tired people, the kind of people who love you in practical ways, who show up and pay the bills and keep the heat on, but who never quite learned how to say the softer things out loud. Brandon was 3 years older than me and took up all the oxygen in every room he entered. Not in a cruel way, not at first. Just in the way that some people are built for the front of a stage, and some people are built for the back, and everyone in the audience only looks one direction. He was 6'2" by his junior year of high school, moved like someone who knew exactly where his body was in space, and had a laugh that made adults trust him on sight. He quarterbacked for Hoban, which in Akron is not a hobby. It is a civic identity. On Friday nights, my father wore Brandon's number on a foam-backed pin on his jacket. My mother kept a laminated newspaper clipping on the refrigerator for 3 years. I was the one with the calculator at the kitchen table. I'm not saying I was overlooked out of cruelty. I'm saying that in a household running on 2 incomes, 1 overnight shift, and a lot of pride borrowed from a teenager's throwing arm, there wasn't much bandwidth left over for a daughter whose achievements didn't photograph well. I won the district math competition my sophomore year. My father nodded when I told him. Then he asked if I'd seen where he put the sports section. That was the whole pattern in miniature, right there. The oak table sat in our dining room like a piece of furniture that had decided it was also a throne. My dad had built it from a kit the year Brandon was born, and it had been slightly uneven on one leg ever since, a small warp in the wood that everyone had quietly accommodated for 20 years. Holidays, arguments, birthday dinners, tax seasons, everything that mattered in the Merritt household happened at that table. Brandon sat at the head of it. Always. It started when he was 12, and it was never discussed. It just was. I sat at the far end, nearest the kitchen, where it was easy to get up and refill things. I joined the FBI's Financial Crimes Division at 26, after 3 years as a forensic accountant at a regional firm where I was good enough to be loaded with work and overlooked for partnerships simultaneously. The federal position came with a pay cut, a security clearance application, and the best professional decision of my life. Patricia Owens was my supervisor for my 3rd month in. She was 57, from Detroit, built like someone who had spent 30 years refusing to be underestimated. She kept her desk completely clear except for one framed photo of her daughters and a legal pad that was always full of notes nobody else was allowed to read. She did not waste words. The first time she called me into her office, I thought I'd made an error on a file. She slid a personnel form across the desk. Sign this. It's a skills assessment. HR uses it to track advancement eligibility. I signed it. I didn't know until 2 years later that it was a promotion nomination. You have good instincts, she told me that afternoon, leaning back in her chair, studying me in the particular way she had, like she was reading a document. But you apologize before you've even said anything. Stop doing that. I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. What I understood much later was that Patricia had spent her entire career in rooms that were not built for her. She had learned to move through them without shrinking and without performing. What she was trying to hand me, across that desk, was not a promotion. It was a posture. You belong in the room. Act accordingly. 6 months into my federal position, the security clearance application process began. Standard procedure. I listed my references, submitted my financial disclosures, provided my employment history. The background investigators conducted interviews with family members. Brandon volunteered. I remember thinking that was generous, thoughtful even. My brother, taking time out of his day to help me get a federal clearance. I called my mom that night and said something like, "Brandon came through for me." She said, "He always does, Cass." I held that sentence longer than I should have. The clearance was delayed 8 months, with a formal notice citing inconsistencies requiring additional review. I was never told what those inconsistencies were. I hired a small practice attorney to help navigate the review process. He was puzzled. He told me my file was clean. He couldn't find the source of the flag. I got the clearance eventually. I assumed bureaucratic backlog. I moved on. In my desk drawer, I kept one thing from those months. The attorney's final letter confirming clearance approval, paperclipped to my original application. I kept it for no particular reason. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. The distance between Akron and the field office where I worked was 140 miles and, increasingly, something harder to measure. It started as a feeling the way most things do. Phone calls with my mother that were slightly warmer at the start, and then hit a wall I couldn't locate. My father asking questions about my finances with a careful, sideways casualness that didn't match him. Once, during Christmas my 29th year, I overheard him tell my Uncle Dennis that I'd been going through some things. I didn't know what things. I asked my mother later. She changed the subject with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Brandon, meanwhile, had moved back to Akron full-time after 2 years of nothing much happening in Columbus. His football career had ended his sophomore year of college with a torn ACL and what I think was a psychological injury nobody in our family had the vocabulary to name. He came home charming and useful. He helped my dad with the yard. He drove my mom to her doctor's appointments. He started attending family dinners with the consistency he'd once reserved for practice. He also started handling my parents' finances. It was framed as a favor. My mom had always done the bill paying, but had mentioned offhandedly that it was getting overwhelming. Brandon offered. My parents, who loved him and trusted him and had never once been given a reason not to, accepted. I didn't think anything of it. Then last spring, I came home on a Sunday for no particular reason. I stopped by without calling ahead, which I almost never do. My mother was in the kitchen on the phone. She had her back to me and didn't hear me come in. "I know, Brandon, I know," she was saying, her voice the patient, slightly apologetic tone she used when she was taking notes. "You want to tell them it was restructured because of Cassidy's situation, the one a few years back." I stopped in the doorway. "I don't know what to call it," she continued. "What do I say exactly?" I set my keys down on the counter very quietly. She turned, saw me, and her face moved through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. "I'll call you back," she told the phone. She hung up and smiled at me like nothing had happened. "Cass, I didn't hear you come in. You want coffee?" "Sure," I said. "That sounds good." I sat at the kitchen table. I drank the coffee. I helped her fold laundry and stayed for dinner and drove home in the dark, and I did not say one word about what I had heard. But I was already building the file. That Monday I called my mother. I told her I wanted to help prepare their tax return this year, that it would be good practice for some continuing education I was completing. She emailed me 7 years of financial records that afternoon. Every statement, every account, every transaction. She sent them over without hesitation, because in her mind she was doing something sweet for her quiet, reliable, slightly too busy to visit daughter. I worked through those files every night for 3 weeks. After my shift, at my kitchen table, with the windows dark and Marcus asleep down the hall, I went through every line. I flagged the $40,000 withdrawal in the savings account, dated 4 years prior, coded as a family loan to me. I had never received $1 of it. I found the beneficiary change on my father's life insurance policy, signed 2 years ago, at what was logged as a routine medical visit. The beneficiary had been changed from my mother to Brandon exclusively. I requested my security clearance interview transcript through a FOIA submission. It arrived on a Tuesday morning. I opened it at my desk at work, read Brandon's statement in its entirety, set it face down on the blotter, and went to the break room and made coffee. I stood at the counter for a few minutes while it brewed. I thought about my dad's football pin, the laminated newspaper clipping, the table with the warped leg, the seat at the head of it I had never once been asked to take. Then I went back to my desk and started drafting the summary document. I need to stop here for a second. If you have ever been in a room where your name was being used against you and you didn't know it yet, drop the word blueprint in the comments. Because that is what my brother built. A blueprint. And I want to know how many of you have lived inside someone else's blueprint without realizing it. Because what I did next, what I had been quietly preparing for 3 weeks, even I didn't fully appreciate until I was sitting at that table. I called an attorney. Not the same one from the clearance review years ago. A new one. A woman named Diane Cho who specialized in civil financial litigation and had a reputation for drafts that were not technically threats but functioned as promises. I gave her the file. All of it. The bank records, the beneficiary change documentation, the clearance transcript, and the summary I had prepared. She read through it in silence for 20 minutes while I sat in the chair across from her desk. When she finished, she looked up. "This is very organized," she said. "I work financial crimes," I told her. She almost smiled. "I'll have the restitution agreement drafted by Thursday." I drove home that night and sat on the back steps for a long time. Marcus came out at some point with a jacket and sat beside me without asking questions, which is one of the main reasons I love him. The neighbor's porch light was on. A dog was barking somewhere down the street. The air smelled like cut grass and distant rain. I thought about my mother's voice on that phone call. Cassidy's situation. A few years back. Said in that careful, cooperative tone, like she was relaying a fact she'd been told so many times it felt like her own memory. She didn't know. That was the part that had taken me the longest to sit with. She wasn't lying to protect Brandon. She just believed him, the way she had always believed him, because he was warm and present and helpful in ways that were visible, and I was useful in ways that were not. I wasn't angry at her for it. I was something more complicated than angry. I was tired of being the thing that disappears because it doesn't make noise. I went inside, opened my laptop, and set the folder on the desk next to it. My father's 65th birthday dinner was in 11 days. I wasn't going to arrive with a speech. I wasn't going to arrive with accusations. I was going to arrive with a manila folder and a simple sentence. That was enough. My father's birthday dinner was on a Saturday in October. My mother had made pot roast, his favorite since before I was born. The house smelled the way it always did on holidays, meat and something baked, the specific warmth of a gas oven running all afternoon. 6 people around the table, aunts and uncles on my father's side, the ones who had known me since I was 8 years old and had spent the last several years treating me with a particular careful politeness that I now understood was Brandon's work. The table was set the way it always was. Brandon at the head of it. He was in a good mood. He brought a nice bottle of wine and made the joke about my father's age that everyone laughed at, the one he made every year with minor variations. He was holding a beer by the neck, gesturing with it as he spoke, the way he did when he was comfortable in a room. He was always comfortable in a room. He proposed a toast. "To Dad," he said, raising the bottle. 65 years. Still the hardest working man I know. And the best father either of us could have asked for. He looked at me when he said that last part. I smiled. Everyone drank. I waited until my father set his glass down, until the room had settled back into the warmth of dinner table conversation. Then I reached into my bag, and I took out the manila folder. I did not open it. I set it on the table in front of me and slid it, with one hand, flat along the surface, until it came to rest directly in front of my father. "Dad," I said, calmly, in my normal voice. "I think you should read page 2 before we cut the cake." He looked at the folder. He looked at me. Brandon laughed. It was a good laugh, easy and dismissive. "What is this, Cass? You bring homework to birthday dinner now." I didn't look at him. My father opened the folder. The table continued for a moment, conversations overlapping in the easy noise of a family meal. My Aunt Gloria was saying something about her neighbor's fence. My mother was reaching for the bread basket. Uncle Dennis was asking my father something about the game on Sunday. Then my father stopped moving. He was on page 2. 7 years of bank statements for transactions circled in blue ink, one line underscored twice. $40,000. Coded as a family loan.
To me.
With a date I could account for exactly because I have a federal employment record that places me 140 miles away the week that money moved. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way a fire goes out, from the edges first. Brandon's wife, Melanie, noticed before Brandon did. She had been reaching for the wine, and she stopped when she saw my father's face. Her hand stayed suspended over the table for a moment. Then she slowly set the bottle down. My father turned to page 4. The security clearance transcript. Brandon's statement, highlighted in yellow, 3 paragraphs long. Clean, deliberate, professional. The language of someone who has thought through what they are saying. My father read it once. Then he read it again. I could see his lips moving slightly, the way they did when he was reading something he was trying to understand. Brandon put his beer down.
Dad, he said.
His voice had shifted. Still controlled, but lighter now. Careful in a new way. Whatever that is, I'm sure there's a... Brandon. My father's voice was quiet. Not angry. Not yet. Just absolutely flat. The room was fully silent. Melanie picked up the folder. She read the highlighted section. I watched her jaw tighten. I watched her set the folder down and move her chair back from the table, just slightly. Just an inch. My mother looked at me across the table, her face open and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen since I was very small.
Cassidy, she said.
What is this? It's a case file, Mom. I kept my voice even. I built it the same way I build every case. I just wanted Dad to have it. I did not look at Brandon. I picked up my fork. The pot roast smells amazing, I said. It always does. I need to pause here because what happened next in that dining room is something I still think about. What do you think Brandon did when Dad closed the folder? Option A. He admitted everything. Option B. He tried to explain it away. Option C. He left the table. Drop your answer in the comments, because the truth is more revealing than any of those 3 options. And what happened in the weeks that followed is where the story either breaks you or builds you, depending on which side of the table you're sitting on. He sat there. That was the answer. Brandon Merritt, who had never in his life run out of words, sat at the head of that table and said nothing for a very long time. His mouth open once.
Closed.
Melanie was looking at her plate. My Aunt Gloria had excused herself to the kitchen. The birthday cake on the counter was still in its box. My father asked everyone except Brandon and my mother to give us a few minutes. The room cleared with the quiet speed of people who understand they are witnessing something they are not supposed to see. Uncle Dennis squeezed my shoulder on his way out, brief and firm. What happened next at that table I wasn't present for in full. I gave my parents that. I excused myself after 20 minutes and sat on the front steps in the October cold while the conversation I had set in motion ran its course behind the door. Diane Cho had the restitution agreement delivered to Brandon by certified mail the following Tuesday. The terms were straightforward. Full repayment of $40,000 to our parents' savings account within 18 months, reversion of the life insurance beneficiary within 30 days, and signed documentation of both. In exchange, I would not submit the file to the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division, where I had enough to initiate a formal referral and enough colleagues who would take it seriously. Brandon signed within a week. I found out later from Melanie, who called me once, about 3 months after the birthday dinner, that she had not known. She was not calling to ask for anything. She was calling to say that she had spent her marriage explaining Brandon's behavior to herself, and that the folder had simply been the last document in a file she had been building in her own mind for years. They were separated by December. The $40,000 came back to my parents in installments, restructured through Diane's office as a correction from a financial institution account discrepancy. My father never knew exactly how it was arranged.
He didn't ask.
He trusted me with the details in the particular way he never had before, which was quietly completely, and without qualification. Brandon's standing in the family did not collapse through any dramatic announcement. There was no group text, no exile. What happened was simpler and more permanent. People stopped asking him to weigh in on things, stopped calling him first. Uncle Dennis, who had always deferred to Brandon on anything involving my father, started calling me instead. Small shifts, irreversible ones. Brandon had spent 15 years building a reputation on being the one who could be trusted with anything that mattered. That was the asset he lost. And there was no recovering it because trust, once it starts being verified, never fully stops. I had two separate conversations that fall that I want to tell you about because they were both harder than the birthday dinner, in different ways. The first was with my mother. We sat at the kitchen table, the two of us, on a Wednesday afternoon in November. The house smelled like instant coffee and dish soap, the way it always had. She wrapped her hands around her mug and looked at the surface of the table for a long time before she spoke. "I didn't know about the money," she said. "I want you to believe that." "I do," I said. And I meant it. But I knew something wasn't right. She looked up at me.
Her eyes were dry.
She was past the crying. "Every time your father and I started looking at you a certain way, every time Brandon said something about your spending, or your work, or your attitude, and I let it sit. I didn't ask you." She shook her head. "I should have just asked you, Cass." I looked at her. My mother, 61 years old, still tired from a lifetime of overnight shifts, sitting in the house she had cleaned and maintained for 30 years. "You believed him because he made himself believable," I said. "That's on him, Mom."
"Not you."
"Some of it's on me," she said simply. And she was right. So I nodded. The second conversation was with Brandon. We met at a diner in Cuyahoga Falls, halfway between his apartment and mine. I chose the location. He arrived 5 minutes early, which told me he was nervous. He looked like someone who had not been sleeping well. He'd lost weight. He kept turning his coffee cup on the table in small circles. "I'm not here for an apology," I told him before he could start. "I don't need you to explain it. I've read your own words. I know exactly what you did, and exactly why." He stopped turning the cup. "What I want to know," I said, "is whether you are willing to do one thing. One real thing." He looked at me. "Our parents are 61 and 63 years old. They have what's left of their savings and whatever's left of their health. If you want to remain in this family, in any real sense, then for the rest of the time they're alive, you show up. You do the yard. You drive them to appointments. You be the thing you performed for 15 years, actually without a payout attached to it." The diner hummed around us. A waitress refilled something at the next table. "That's it," he said. "That's everything," I said. He nodded. There was no charm in it. No performance. It was just a man in a diner booth, nodding, because he had run out of other options. I don't know if he will hold to it. Some days, I believe he might. Some days I think people are mostly what they practice being, and Brandon has practiced the wrong things for too long. But I gave him the door. Whether he walks through it correctly is his work to do, not mine. 8 months later, I am a supervisory special agent. The promotion came through in March, and Patricia shook my hand in the hallway and said, "Took long enough," which from her is a standing ovation. Marcus and I got engaged on a Wednesday evening in February, takeout cooling on the counter, both of us in sweatshirts. He got down on one knee in our kitchen, slightly off balance because the dog was in the way, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. "We are getting married in the fall."
Small.
Outside. Exactly what we want. My father calls me on Sunday mornings now. Not every Sunday, not yet, but enough that it has become something I count on. He asks about my cases in the careful way of someone who doesn't fully understand the work, but wants to. He listens when I explain things. Twice, he has asked follow-up questions. That is more than I had from him in the first 30 years of my life combined, and I am choosing to let it be enough because enough, honestly earned, is more than I know what to do with. The oak table is still in their dining room, still uneven on that one leg, still stained from 20 years of holidays. Last Thanksgiving, my mother set the table and put my father at the head of it the way she always had. She put Brandon at the far end, nearest the kitchen. She put me on my father's right. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody needed to. My father passed me the rolls first. A small thing. Automatic. He probably didn't think about it. I held the basket for a moment longer than necessary, just to feel the weight of it, an ordinary object doing something it had taken 34 years to do. Then I passed it along. I'm going to tell you the one thing I know for certain after all of this. Precision is not coldness. Patience is not passivity. And the woman who sat quietly at the far end of that table for 30 years was not waiting because she had nothing to offer. She was waiting because nobody had thought to ask. I didn't dismantle my brother. I didn't need to. I built a file, I put it on a table, and I let the truth do what the truth always eventually does. It showed up. It sat down. And it was heavier than anything Brandon had ever tried to lift. If you've spent your life being the one nobody thought to worry about, I want you to hear this. That is not a verdict. That is a starting position. Build from it. Document everything. And when the moment comes, and it will come, don't raise your voice. Slide the folder. I'm Cassidy Merritt. I'm 34 years old. I started this story as the daughter nobody asked about, and I'm ending it as the one everyone calls first. If any piece of this story lives in your own life, leave it in the comments. Tell me what your table looked like. Tell me who sat at the head of it, and whether that's still true today. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens next. There's always a next. Link to another story is in the description. I'll see you there.